The moment Mireille Vasquin felt her knees give way beneath her, she knew the secret she had buried for 2 years was about to surface. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store smeared into white rivers above her. The can of generic chicken broth slipped from her fingers and rolled across the linoleum. And then, before her body could meet the floor, two hands caught her, strong, certain, unhesitating. She opened her eyes to a face she recognized from newspapers she pretended not to read. Razvan Kovacheski, the man whose name made bankers go quiet. The man whose driver had double parked outside 3 minutes ago because no one in this city would dare ticket him. He was looking down at her, like he had just caught something far more dangerous than a fainting woman. Before you hear what happened next, do me a favor. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why this aisle changed 2 lives forever. Hit that like button and let's begin. Mireille Vasquin had perfected the art of disappearing. She bought her groceries at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesdays, because that was when the Bridgepoint Market on Hallgren Avenue was emptiest. She paid in cash because cards left trails. She wore the same gray hooded coat in every season because being remembered was a luxury she could no longer afford. The cashiers who scanned her items week after week could not have described her face if a detective had walked in and asked. That was the point. For 2 years, Mireille had built her life around the architecture of being unseen. She rented a basement apartment from an elderly Bulgarian woman who didn't ask questions and accepted 3 months' rent at a time. She worked nights as a transcriptionist for a medical records company that paid by the audio minute and never required her to show up in person. She kept her hair cropped short, dyed a flat brown that resembled no one's natural color. She had not used her real name in 22 months. And every morning at 6:14 a.m., before the city woke up, she walked 4 blocks to the back entrance of St. Anselm's Children's Hospice and slipped inside through a service door a janitor named Petrov left unlocked for her. There, in room 4B, a 7-year-old boy named Tovan slept under a thin yellow blanket, hooked to a machine that breathed for him when his lungs forgot how. He was her brother. He was the only family she had left. And he was the reason she had vanished. The doctors said Tovan had 18 months. That was 14 months ago. Mireille had calculated everything. The cost of his care, the weight of the secret, the precise distance she had to keep between her old life and her new one. She had calculated everything except the possibility that her body, exhausted, undernourished, running on coffee and 3 hours of sleep, would betray her in public. She had not eaten in 19 hours when she walked into the Bridgepoint Market that night. She had not slept more than 4 hours in any of the past 11 days. She was carrying a folded letter in her coat pocket from a debt collector she could not pay, threatening legal action that would expose her name in court records. The same name a man named Dragomir Kovacheski had been searching for since the night her father died. Dragomir Kovacheski, Razvan's older brother, the reason Mireille had disappeared. She had been walking down the canned goods aisle, doing the math on whether she could afford both the broth and the bread, when the edges of her vision began to gray. She remembered reaching for a shelf to steady herself. She remembered the shelf seeming farther away than it should have been. She remembered the absurd thought, Tovan is alone. I cannot fall here. And then a hand closed around her elbow, and another caught the small of her back, and a voice, low, accented, unfamiliar, said something she could not quite parse through the rushing in her ears. When she opened her eyes, Razvan Kovacheski was holding her against his chest like she weighed nothing. His coat smelled like cedar and rain. His eyes, gray, unreadable, were studying her face with an intensity that made her stomach turn cold. Because in that single second, before she could turn away, before she could pull the hood back over her head, before she could become invisible again, she saw the recognition flicker across his expression. He knew her face. And in this city, in his world, being known was the same as being condemned. Easy, he said. I have you. His voice was quieter than she expected. Not the voice of a man who ordered violence over breakfast. A voice that belonged to someone who had spent his life lowering it so people leaned in. Mireille tried to step away. Her legs would not hold her. Razvan adjusted his grip without comment, sliding one arm fully behind her back, and lowered them both into a crouch in the middle of the aisle as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. The chicken broth can rolled to a stop against his polished black shoe. When did you last eat? He asked. I'm fine. That wasn't what I asked. She closed her eyes. The fluorescent lights pulsed behind her eyelids. Get up and walk away. He hasn't placed you yet. He just thinks you look familiar. Get up. But the rushing in her ears would not stop, and her hands had gone numb, and somewhere far away she heard the store manager asking if they should call an ambulance, and Razvan answered before she could. No, I will handle it. In a tone that ended the conversation. He reached into his coat pocket. She tensed. He pulled out a small chocolate bar. The cheap kind. The kind a man like him should not have been carrying. Eat this, he said. Slowly, your blood sugar is gone. She stared at it. Why do you have that? Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth, then vanished. My niece. She gets faint at family dinners. I learned to keep one in every coat. Mireille took the chocolate. Her fingers shook. She bit into it, and the sweetness hit her tongue like a small electrocution, and tears she had refused to cry for 2 years suddenly stung the corners of her eyes for a reason she could not name. It had been so long since anyone had held her up. It had been so long since anyone had handed her anything without expecting something back. Razvan watched her eat. He did not speak. He did not look away. And she felt, with a horror that began in her chest and spread outward, that he was not looking at her like a stranger anymore. He was looking at her the way you look at a puzzle whose final piece you have just turned over in your hand. I know your face, he said finally, quietly, almost to himself. She froze. From where? That, he said, is what I am trying to remember. She forced herself to stand. He rose with her, one hand still hovering near her arm in case she fell again. The grocery store had gone very quiet around them. The cashier was pretending to scan items. The manager was pretending to take inventory. Everyone was watching the most powerful man in the city hold up a woman in a gray coat in aisle 7. Thank you, Mireille said. I'm fine now. Please. She turned to leave. His voice stopped her at the end of the aisle. You forgot your bread? She turned back. He was holding the loaf she had set down before she fell. He had picked it up while she ate. And in the breast pocket of his coat, behind the chocolate, she saw the corner of something she recognized, a folded photograph. The edge of it. Just the edge. But it was enough. Because she knew, without seeing the rest, whose face was on it. It was hers. Mireille did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of Tovan's hospice bed at 3 a.m., listening to the soft mechanical wheeze of the ventilator, watching her brother's chest rise and fall, and replaying the photograph in Razvan Kovacheski's coat over and over in her mind. A man like him did not carry pictures of women he had only just met, which meant he had been looking for her, which meant the question was no longer if she would be found, but how long she had before he came back. He came back at 9 o'clock the next morning. Not to her apartment. He didn't know where she lived. Not yet. He came to the only place he could have known to look. The small cafe 2 doors down from the Bridgepoint Market. The one she had mentioned offhand to the manager when she'd said she felt well enough to walk home. She had said it to throw them off. She had not expected anyone to be listening that carefully. He was already seated when she pushed open the door at 9:04. He had ordered 2 black coffees and a plate of buttered toast. He stood when she walked in. No one had stood for her in 2 years. "Sit down, Miss Vascan," he said, "or whatever name you would prefer I use." She sat because her knees were already failing her again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "That's what people say when they're about to." "Fair." He pushed the toast toward her. "Eat first. Talk after." She did not eat. She folded her hands in her lap so he could not see them shake. "What do you want?" He reached into his coat and placed the photograph on the table between them. It was older than she had feared. A grainy still from a security camera, 3 years old, taken outside a courthouse in a city 800 miles from here. In it, a younger version of herself was helping a much smaller boy into the back of a taxi. Tovin had been 4. He had been able to walk then. "My brother has been looking for you for 2 years," Razvan said. "He believes your father stole something from him before he died. He believes you know where it is." "My father didn't steal anything." "I know." She looked up. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression, the one that had nothing to do with negotiation, and everything to do with a kind of careful, contained attention she had not been on the receiving end of in a very long time. "I have been keeping my brother from finding you," Razvan said, "for 19 months, since I learned what he intended to do." "Why?" "Because I am not him." "That isn't an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He sipped his coffee. She watched the steam curl past his face. He set the cup down with a precision that suggested every gesture he made had been considered 3 steps in advance. "Here is what I am offering," he said. "Protection. From him. From the people he employs. From the court summons in your coat pocket that will publish your real name in 3 weeks if it is not paid. I will make all of it disappear." "In exchange for what?" "You come with me to a dinner this Saturday, the Hallgren Foundation Gala. My brother will be there. I want him to see you sitting at my table untouchable. I want him to understand that you are under my protection now, and that the matter is closed." "You want to use me?" "I want to end this. Permanently. For both of us." "And then what? After Saturday?" Something shifted in his face. "Then you go back to your life. The debt is paid. The court case vanishes. You will never see me again unless you choose to." She studied him for a long time. The cafe was nearly empty. A clock somewhere ticked too loudly. She thought of Tavan in room 4B, of the unpaid hospice invoices stacked on her kitchen counter, of the impossible arithmetic of keeping him alive on a transcriptionist's wages. "I have a condition," she said. He raised one eyebrow. He was not used to conditions. "There is a boy at St. Anselm's Hospice, room 4B. His name is Tovin. He needs a procedure that isn't covered by his insurance. $340,000. Pay for it, in full, before Saturday." "That's a great deal of money for a stranger's child." "He isn't a stranger. He's my brother." The words landed between them. Razvan went very still. She watched him recalculate everything. The photograph, the security footage, the small boy in the taxi 3 years ago. "I see," he said quietly. "Yes or no, Mr. Kovacheski?" He picked up his coffee cup. He did not drink from it. He simply held it, looking at her, and for the first time since the grocery store, she saw something in his expression that was not calculation. "Yes," he said. "It will be done by tomorrow evening." The wire transfer cleared at 6:42 the next evening. Mireille was sitting in the hospice chapel when her phone buzzed. She had gone there because she did not believe him. She had gone there to pray, in the language her mother had used, that she had not just made the worst mistake of her life. The notification from St. Anselm's billing department was 3 lines long. Payment received. Account paid in full. Surgery scheduled for Monday, 7 a.m. She read it 4 times before she allowed herself to cry. She cried in a way she had not cried in 2 years, Not the stifled, exhausted weeping she did over the bathroom sink, but something deeper. Something that came from a part of her she had locked away the day she'd buried her father. She cried until the chapel's elderly volunteer touched her shoulder and asked, in a voice that did not pry, whether she needed water. Mireille shook her head. The woman left a paper cup on the pew beside her and walked away. When the tears stopped, something else began. She walked down the long corridor to room 4B, sat beside Tovan's bed, and told him, though he could not hear her, though the morphine had pulled him somewhere quieter than sleep, that he was going to live. She told him about the pond where their father had taught them both to skip stones. She told him about the song their mother used to hum while braiding her hair. She told him every memory she had been saving for a future she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. That night, for the first time in 22 months, Mireille slept 7 hours. When she woke, something had shifted. She walked to the small mirror above her bathroom sink and looked at herself the way she had not allowed herself to look in 2 years. She saw a woman who had lost 15 pounds she could not afford to lose, whose hair had been cropped not for style, but for invisibility, whose mother had once told her she had her grandmother's eyes that, the grandmother used to say, did not know how to look at the floor. Mireille had been looking at the floor for 2 years. She made a decision. She walked 4 blocks to a community library on Hallgren Avenue and used a public computer. She read the gala's guest list, history, and dress code. She searched for Dragomir Kovacheski and found very little, all of it carefully scrubbed. She searched for Razvan and found more, and most of it surprised her. Quiet philanthropic work, 2 children's hospitals he had funded, rumors that he and his brother had not spoken in 3 years. She stayed at that computer for 6 hours. When she walked home, the woman who had bought groceries at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesdays was already beginning to disappear, and someone older, someone who had once been a graduate student in linguistics at a university she had abandoned the night her father died, was beginning to wake up underneath. The next afternoon, she went to see a woman named Ostara Pelinen. Ostara had been her mother's closest friend before her mother died. She was 71 years old, a retired costume designer who had spent 40 years dressing actresses for the regional opera house. She lived in a narrow apartment above a bakery, and when Mireille knocked on the door for the first time in 2 years, Ostara opened it, looked at her for a long moment, and said only, "You came back. I'm sorry I disappeared." "I'm sorry you had to." Ostara made tea. They sat by a window that looked out over a courtyard full of pigeons. Mireille told her everything. The photograph, the brother in room 4B, the gala on Saturday. Ostara listened without interrupting, without flinching, without offering cheap reassurances. When Mireille finished, Ostara stood up and walked to a closet at the back of the apartment. She came back carrying a garment bag. "Your mother left this with me the year before she died," Ostara said. "She said if I ever saw you in trouble, I should give it to you. I have been waiting. I was beginning to think I would never get the chance." Mireille opened the bag with hands that had begun to tremble. Inside was a dress. Deep emerald silk, hand-embroidered with a pattern of climbing ivy along the bodice. Work so fine it could only have been done by a single person at a single table for hundreds of hours. It was old. It was unmistakably her mother's. "It needs altering," Ostara said. "I have 3 days. It will be enough." "Why are you helping me?" Ostara reached across the table and took both of Mireille's hands in her own. Her grip was stronger than it should have been for a woman her age. "Because your mother spent her whole life teaching you to make yourself small," she said. "And I watched her regret it every single day after you were born. I am not going to let you walk into that room small. Not for him. Not for anyone." That night, walking home through streets that suddenly looked unfamiliar in their ordinariness, Mireille felt her phone buzz. A single text, from a number she had not saved. "He knows you're alive. Be careful where you sleep tonight. R. She slept at the hospice that night. Petrov, the janitor with the unlocked door, set up a folding cot in the supply closet across the hall from Tovan's room without asking why. He brought her a thin blanket and a thermos of black tea, and when she tried to thank him, he waved her off with the impatience of a man who had been doing small kindnesses for desperate people his entire life. I had a sister once, was all he said. She lay in the dark listening to the soft beep of monitors through the walls, and she did not feel afraid. That was the strange thing. She had spent 2 years afraid of every shadow, every footstep, every car that slowed near her on the street. And now, on the night she had been told to be careful, she felt something else entirely. She felt awake. Friday morning, she went to Ostara's apartment for the first fitting. The dress had already been transformed. Ostara had taken it apart at the seams and rebuilt it from the structure outward, modernizing the silhouette without disturbing the embroidery, removing the dated shoulder pads, dropping the back into a clean, low curve that her mother would never have dared, but Mireille's grandmother, the one who had refused to look at the floor, absolutely would have. When Mireille slipped it on and turned toward the mirror, she did not recognize the woman who turned with her. I look like her, she whispered. Like your mother? Like my grandmother. Ostara smiled. Good. She is the one you'll need on Saturday. They worked through the afternoon. Ostara pinned and repinned, adjusted the bodice by half centimeters, lengthened the hem so it would graze the floor without dragging. She worked in silence, the way she had worked in opera houses for 40 years, with the calm of a woman who knew that what she was making was armor disguised as silk. While she worked, she talked. She told Mireille things her mother had never told her. That her mother had once been engaged to a different man before her father. A man with money and a bad reputation, the kind of man Dragomir Kovacheski reminded Ostara of. That her mother had broken the engagement at 23 and run from that life with 2 suitcases and no plan, and had met Mireille's father a year later in a bookstore. That the dress Mireille was wearing now was not the dress her mother had been given by that first man. It was the dress her mother had bought herself, with her own money, the week she had walked away. She wore this dress the night she chose her own life, Ostara said. I think she knew, even then, that one day you might need to choose yours. Mireille could not speak. There is one more thing. Ostara walked to her dressing table and returned with a small velvet pouch. She placed it in Mireille's palm. Inside was a thin gold chain with a single oval pendant, a piece of pale green sea glass, set in a simple gold bezel. Your mother found this on a beach the morning after she left him. She told me it was the first thing she had ever owned that no one had given her. She wanted you to have it when you were ready. Mireille closed her hand around the pendant. It was warm somehow, against her palm. How will I know I'm ready? You're holding it, aren't you? That night, walking back toward the hospice with the garment bag draped carefully over her arm, Mireille turned the corner onto Hallgren Avenue and stopped. A black car was parked across from St. Anselm's. The engine was running. The driver was watching the front entrance. And it was not Razvan's car. She did not go in through the front. Mireille walked past the hospice without breaking stride, turned at the corner of Hallgren and Beckwith, and circled 3 full blocks before doubling back through the alley behind the building. She slipped through Petrov's service door at 9:47 p.m., with the garment bag clutched against her chest like a shield. She called Razvan from the supply closet at 10:03. He answered on the first ring. There's a car outside the hospice, she said. I know. He's been there for an hour. How did he find? He didn't. He's guessing. He has someone watching every place a woman with no money might disappear into. The hospice was on his list. He hasn't placed Tovan yet. He won't. Before Saturday. How can you be sure? A pause. Because the man in that car works for me now. He just doesn't know I know. Mireille closed her eyes. The casualness with which Razvan said it, the quiet competence of a man who had been outmaneuvering his brother for 19 months without telling anyone, made something inside her tilt. "Saturday," she said. "Where am I meeting you?" "I'll send a car at 7. "No. Mireille. I'll arrive on my own, 8:15. I want to walk in alone." She heard him exhale on the other end of the line. A small sound, almost a laugh. "You understand what you are walking into." "I understand exactly." "Good," he said. "Then I will see you at 8:15. The Hallgren Foundation Gala was held every spring on the rooftop conservatory of the Velicourt Hotel, 18 stories above the river, in a glass-domed ballroom built in 1923 by a railroad heiress who had wanted, in her own words, a room where the sky could see what we were doing. Mireille arrived at 8:14 p.m. She did not stop at the entrance. She did not pause for photographs. She walked through the gilded doors with her chin lifted and the sea glass pendant resting at her collarbone, and she crossed the marble foyer the way her grandmother had once crossed a customs line in 1956 with a forged passport and a child on her hip. Without hurry, as if she had every right to be there because she had already decided she did. Heads turned. She had not anticipated that. She had imagined slipping in unnoticed, taking her seat, surviving the night. But the emerald dress caught the chandelier light and held it, and the embroidery moved when she moved, and a woman in cobalt blue near the bar paused mid-sentence to watch her pass. A waiter offered her champagne. She took it. She did not drink it. She had walked perhaps 12 steps into the ballroom when a voice at her elbow said, "You're new." She turned. The speaker was a woman in her early 70s, silver-haired, wearing a black gown that was 20 years out of fashion and looked deliberately so. Her eyes were sharp and amused. "Ivana Hallgren," the woman said, extending a hand. "This is my family's foundation. I like to know who's wandered into my conservatory." Mireille Vasquin. The name came out before she could stop it. Her real name. The one she had not spoken aloud in almost 2 years. Ivana's eyes flickered, not with recognition, but with interest. "Vasquin," Ivana repeated. "I knew a Petros Vasquin once, a linguist, translated Cavafy beautifully. He was my father." Ivana went very still. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Then you are exactly the kind of person I hoped would crash my party. Come, walk with me." Ivana took her arm, just like that. As if Mireille were not a woman who had been hiding for 2 years, as if she were simply a guest worth knowing. They moved through the ballroom together, and Mireille watched the room reorganize itself around the simple fact of Ivana Hallgren's hand on her arm. "You're being watched," Ivana murmured, smiling at no one in particular. "I know. By 2 different men, from opposite sides of the room. One of them looks like he wants to protect you. The other looks like he wants to know how much you cost." "That's accurate." "Which one are you here with?" "The first one, but I'm here for myself." Ivana laughed, a low, delighted sound. "Oh, my dear, I'm going to enjoy tonight." She pressed something small into Mireille's palm before letting go of her arm. A folded card, a phone number, written in fountain pen. In case the second one becomes a problem. Across the room, Mireille saw Razvan for the first time that evening. He was standing near a column at the far end of the ballroom, holding a glass of something amber, talking to a man she did not recognize. He had not seen her arrive. When his eyes finally found hers across 40 feet of crystal and music and bodies, his expression did something it had not done in the cafe or the grocery store. It softened. Just for a fraction of a second. Just enough that she saw it before he buried it. And then she saw the other man. Dragomir Kovacheski was seated at a round table near the dance floor, watching her with the patient stillness of a hunter who had been waiting a very long time. He raised his glass to her. He smiled. And then he gestured with a single finger to the empty chair beside him. She did not sit beside him. Mireille walked past Dragomir's table without slowing, without acknowledging the gesture, without giving him the satisfaction of a single glance, and crossed to the table where Razvan was already pulling out a chair for her. She sat. The chair across from her was empty. The chair to her left held a tall, severe woman in white who introduced herself as Aldreda Solness, the Foundation's treasurer. The chair to her right was Razvan's. Dragomir came to them. He did not wait. He crossed the room with a glass in his hand and a smile arranged on his face, and he stopped behind the empty chair across from Mireille, and he said, in a voice loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, "Brother, you haven't introduced me to your guest." Razvan did not stand. "Mireille, this is Dragomir. Dragomir, please sit down. You're blocking the waiter." "I'd rather stand. I'd like to look at her properly." "Then look from your own table." The exchange was quiet, almost casual, but the air between the two men had become something Mireille could feel against her skin. Aldreda Solness lifted her water glass with a hand that did not quite tremble. A man at the next table stopped speaking mid-sentence. Dragomir sat down anyway, in the empty chair, across from her. "Miss Vasquen," he said. "Or do you prefer the other name? The one on the apartment lease in Wellbridge County? The one on the prescription bottle for the boy in room 4B? Mireille did not move. She had prepared for this. She had spent every hour of the last 48 rehearsing the moment Dragomir Kovacheski would say her brother's name out loud in public. She had imagined her hands shaking, her voice breaking, every version of her own collapse. She had not imagined what actually happened. What actually happened was this. A small, cold, very clear thought rose to the surface of her mind, and it said, "He just told everyone at this table that he has been watching a sick child," and she stopped being afraid. "Mr. Kovacheski," she said. Her voice came out level. "How long have you been having a 7-year-old hospice patient surveilled?" The question landed. Aldrida Solness set down her water glass. The man at the next table turned fully in his seat. Dragomir's smile thinned. "That is a strange question. It's the only question that matters. You just told a room full of witnesses that you know which room my brother sleeps in, which medication he takes, which lease I signed. I'd like the room to understand how you came by that information. I have associates. You have men following a dying child. Now, that is dramatic. It's accurate." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The acoustics of the conservatory, designed in 1923 to carry an opera singer's whisper to the back row, were carrying every word she said to tables she could not see. "My father borrowed nothing from you. My father owed nothing to you. My father translated poetry for a living and died of a heart attack in a public library. You have spent 2 years harassing his children over a debt that does not exist, and tonight, in front of every person at this gala, you have just admitted to surveilling a hospice. You should be careful, Miss Vasquen." "Why?" "Because you do not know what you are doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that travels. It moved outward from their table in concentric rings, table by table, until even the string quartet on the far balcony noticed and faltered for half a measure before recovering. Mireille kept her eyes on Dragomir. She did not look at Razvan. She did not look at Ivana Hallgren, who she could feel watching from across the room. She looked at the man who had taken 2 years of her life and made her believe she deserved to disappear, and she did not blink. "My father loved language," she said. "He used to tell me that the most dangerous thing a person could do was give someone else the right to name them. For 2 years I let you name me. I let you turn me into a woman who hid in basements and bought groceries at midnight and could not say her own brother's name out loud. I am not that woman tonight." Pretty speech. It isn't a speech. It's a notice. Of what? That I am no longer afraid of you, and that anyone in this room who has ever been afraid of you should understand right now that fear is the only thing holding you up. Aldrita Solness very quietly said, "Hear, hear." It was a small sound, but it was the first sound. And once one person at a gala has spoken, the spell of silence breaks. A man at the next table cleared his throat and said, "I've wondered for years what kind of business his money came from." A woman across the dance floor said, more loudly than she needed to, "I told Edmund we shouldn't have seated him on the board." Dragomir's face had begun to change. He stood up. He looked at Razvan, really looked at him, for what Mireille suddenly understood was the first time in 3 years. "You did this," he said. "No," Razvan answered. "She did. I just stopped getting in her way." Dragomir turned back to Mireille. His mouth opened. Whatever he intended to say, he did not get to say it. Because at that exact moment, every set of double doors at the eastern end of the conservatory opened at once, and 4 men in dark suits and 1 woman in a federal jacket walked into the ballroom. Ivana Hallgren had made her phone call. The woman in the federal jacket was named Helena Brescu. She walked the length of the ballroom in a pair of unfashionable shoes and stopped beside Dragomir's chair, and she said, in a voice trained to carry, without raising, "Mr. Kovacheski, I'd like a word." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that 2 minutes ago you confessed, in front of approximately 90 witnesses, to the prolonged surveillance of a minor receiving end-of-life care. We can discuss the rest in the car." Dragomir looked at the room. The room had become a thing he no longer ruled. Conversations had stopped. Faces he had bought dinner for, faces he had funded campaigns for, faces that had laughed at his jokes for 20 years. None of them would meet his eyes. He looked, Mireille realized, like a man who had just discovered that the floor he had been standing on was painted on water. He went with Asian Brescu without resistance. The conservatory did not erupt when the doors closed behind him. There was no applause. What happened instead was stranger and, Mireille thought afterward, more beautiful. A slow unspooling of voices, a dozen private conversations restarting at once, the string quartet finding its place in the music again, the hum of a room that had just remembered how to breathe. A woman she did not know touched her arm in passing and said, "Thank you." Aldrita Solness leaned across the table and said very quietly, "I have wanted to say what you said for 19 years. I never had the courage. Thank you for borrowing some of mine tonight without asking." Mireille could not speak. Razvan reached under the table and took her hand. She let him. They left the gala together at 11:40 p.m. Ivana Hallgren walked them to the elevator personally. She pressed a second card into Mireille's hand, this one with no name on it, only an address, and said, "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. We have things to discuss." In the elevator, Razvan finally spoke. "I have to tell you something." "I know." "You don't." "Then tell me." He waited until the doors closed, until they were alone, descending 18 stories through a quiet building. "Tovan surgery on Monday," he said. "The procedure your insurance wouldn't cover. The reason it costs $340,000 is that there are exactly 4 surgeons in the country who can perform it. The one I paid for is the 3rd best." "What is that?" "The first best is a woman named Inga Villanora. She works out of Zurich. She has not taken a new patient in 14 months. He paused. "She owed my mother a favor. My mother died 9 years ago and never called it in. I called it in this morning." Mireille's vision went strange at the edges. "Tovan's procedure on Monday is being done by Dr. Vellanora," Razvan said. "She flew in this afternoon. The surgical team has been assembled. It is the same procedure your insurance refused, performed by the only person on Earth with a 94% success rate instead of a 61% one." "Why?" she whispered. "Because 61% is not enough. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Neither of them moved. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you tell me before? Because if I had told you before the gala, you would have thought you owed me. You would have walked into that room as my debt instead of as yourself. I needed Dragomir to see what I saw in the grocery store. The woman who stood up without my hand on her elbow. She turned to face him fully. There were tears on her face. She had not noticed them starting. Razvan, why are you doing any of this? He was quiet for a long moment. 11 years ago, he said, my brother took something from me. Not money. A person. A girl I was going to marry. He decided she was a liability to the family business and he made her disappear. I have spent 11 years pretending it didn't break me. And then, 19 months ago, I found a security camera photograph of a woman helping a small boy into a taxi, and I recognized something in her face I had not seen in 11 years. The look of someone being hunted by my brother and still, somehow, refusing to run. I decided that day that whatever else I did with my life, I was not going to let him take another one. She did not know what to say. She reached up instead and touched the sea glass pendant at her collarbone, the first thing her mother had ever owned that no one had given her. And she understood, with a clarity she had not expected, that she was no longer holding it for her mother. She was holding it for herself. Take me to my brother, she said. Now? Now. I want to be there when he wakes up tomorrow. Sunday is the prep day. The team needs his consent forms signed in person before Monday morning. I want him to know, before the surgery, that we are both going to be alive on the other side of it. Razvan nodded. He held the door for her. They walked out of the Velishore Hotel together into a cold spring night, and across the street, parked at the curb where a black car had been watching the hospice the night before, Mireille saw nothing at all. The street was empty. For the first time in 2 years, no one was following her. Tavan's surgery lasted 9 hours. Mireille sat in the waiting room of St. Anslem's surgical wing from 6:50 a.m. until 4:13 p.m., and Razvan sat with her. He did not speak unless she spoke first. He brought her water she did not drink and sandwiches she did not eat. At 11 a.m., he stood up, walked to the window, made one phone call in a language she did not recognize, and came back. At 4:13 p.m., a tall woman with gray hair and tired eyes pushed through the double doors, pulled off her surgical cap, and said, "He's alive. The valve held. He'll need 8 weeks to heal, but he will heal. He will breathe on his own again." Mireille did not cry. That was the strange thing. The relief was too big for tears. It moved through her body the way an earthquake moves through bedrock. Silently, fundamentally, leaving everything rearranged. Dr. Inga Velanora shook her hand. Then she shook Razvan's hand. Then she said, with the bluntness of a surgeon who had been awake for 14 hours, "Your brother had a remarkable will to live. Whatever you've been telling him, keep telling him." She walked away before Mireille could thank her. The story broke on Monday afternoon. A reporter named Henrik Aslund had been at the gala. He had been at the next table. He had heard everything. By 5 p.m. on Monday, his article had been published in the regional paper, picked up by 2 national outlets, and was trending in 3 cities. The headline read, "Gala Confrontation Exposes Decades of Surveillance Allegations Against Kovacheski." The article quoted Mireille by name. It described Tavan's surgery without identifying the hospital. It treated her, throughout, the way Ivana Hallgren had. As a guest worth knowing, not a curiosity. By Tuesday, 3 other people had come forward with their own stories about Dragomir. By Wednesday, it was 7. By Friday, it was 19. Mireille's phone began to ring on Thursday morning. She did not answer most of the calls. She answered the one from Ivana Hallgren. "Come to my house," Ivana said. "Bring the boy when he can travel. There is something we need to build." "Build? You have just become, accidentally, the face of something that a great many quiet people have wanted for a long time. I am going to give you the choice of what to do with that. You can disappear back into your life, and I will help you do it, and I will make sure you are never bothered again. Or you can use this. Let me help you build a foundation. For the families he hurt. For the children in places like St. Anselm's. For the people who never got to make their own phone calls. Why me? Because when I introduced myself to you on Saturday, you told me your real name. You had not used your real name in 2 years, and you used it with me before you knew who I was. I am 72 years old, and I have learned to trust people who tell the truth before they know whether the truth is safe. Mireille sat with the question for 3 days. She walked the hospice halls. She sat by Tovan's bed and watched him breathe, really breathe, on his own, without the machine. And she thought about every version of her life she had ever imagined, and then surrendered. The graduate degree she had abandoned, the book she had been translating with her father in the months before he died, the future her mother had wanted for her, and that she had folded up the day she'd walked into that first hospice room 2 years ago. On the third night, she sat at her kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a cup of tea going cold in her hands and called Razvan. He answered. I'm going to say yes to her, she said. Good. I need to ask you something. Anything? What happens to us after all this? I'm going to be busy. I'm going to be visible in a way I haven't been in a long time. I'm going to be a person again, and I don't know yet what that person wants. I don't know what I can give you. I'm not asking you to give me anything. I know. But I want you to know I see what you've done. I see all of it. And I don't want to walk into whatever comes next pretending I owe you nothing, or pretending I owe you everything. I want to walk in next to you, as your equal, or not at all. He was quiet for a long time. As my equal, he said, or not at all. I accept those terms. She smiled into the dark. Good night, Razvan. Good night, Mireille. 2 years passed. Tovan Vasken turned 9 on a Saturday in late September. He celebrated his birthday at a farmhouse 2 hours outside the city, on a property his sister had bought with the first salary she had drawn from the Vasken Hallgren Foundation. There was a pond at the back of the property, and his sister taught him how to skip stones across it the way their father had once taught her. He could only manage 2 skips that first day. By the end of the afternoon, he had managed 4. Mireille watched him from the porch with a cup of coffee in her hands and tried to remember what it had felt like, 2 years ago, to count the months she had left to keep him alive. She could not remember anymore. That was the strange and merciful thing about a life rebuilt from the ground up. The old shape of fear became, eventually, harder and harder to recall. She still woke sometimes at 4 a.m., with her heart racing for no reason. She still flinched at unexpected footsteps behind her. But the woman who had bought groceries at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesdays was someone she now thought of in the third person, the way you think of a character in a book you read a long time ago. The Vasken Hallgren Foundation had, by its second year, funded 11 hospice facilities, 8 legal defense funds for families targeted by financial intimidation, and a small linguistic scholarship in her father's name, awarded annually to one student who was the first in their family to attend university. The first recipient was a young woman named Sorina Petrova, the daughter of a janitor at St. Anselm's Children's Hospice. Mireille presented the scholarship herself in a small ceremony at the public library on Hallgren Avenue. She spoke for 4 minutes. She mentioned her father. She mentioned a poem of Cavafy's he had loved. She mentioned, without naming him, a man who had once told a roomful of strangers that her father had been a thief. She did not mention that the man was now serving the 3rd year of a 14-year sentence for charges that had begun on a Saturday night in a glass conservatory with a single accurate question about a hospice room. Everyone in the library already knew. She finished her graduate degree in the spring of the second year. She defended her thesis, a comparative analysis of three 20th century Eastern European poets her father had loved, on a Tuesday morning in a small wood-paneled room at the university she had once walked away from. Ostara Pelinen sat in the front row in a hat that was deliberately too large. Ivana Hallgren sat beside her and made notes. Mireille was too nervous to read upside down. Tovan, who had insisted on coming despite a school day, sat between them and held a small bouquet of pond flowers he had picked himself. Razvan sat in the back row. He had asked, before the defense, whether she wanted him there at all. They had been together, slowly, carefully, on her terms, for a year and 4 months by then, but he had a careful way of always asking, of never assuming any space in her life that she had not explicitly offered. She had told him yes. She had wanted him in the back row, where she could find his face when she needed to. She found it twice during the defense. Once when a committee member asked a question she did not immediately know how to answer. Once when she finished her closing remarks, and the room went briefly silent before the applause. The committee passed her with distinction. Outside, in the corridor, Tovan handed her the pond flowers and said, with the gravity only a 9-year-old can muster, "You did good, Mira. Dad would say you did well." She held him for a long time. The proposal happened on a Sunday afternoon. It happened in the canned goods aisle of the Bridgepoint Market on Hallgren Avenue. She had stopped going there for 2 years after the night she'd fainted. She had not been able to walk past the building without her chest tightening. And then one afternoon in the 3rd spring, she had walked past it and felt nothing. No fear, no flashback, no pull at all. And she had told Razvan over dinner that she was finally free of the place. He had laughed and said well, because he had always hated their bread anyway. And then, on the Sunday 3 weeks later, he had asked her to come grocery shopping with him because Tovan was sleeping over at a friend's house and he wanted to cook her something. They walked into the Bridgepoint Market on Hallgren Avenue at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, not at midnight, not in a gray hooded coat, not invisible. And somewhere between the rice and the dried beans, Razvan had stopped walking. She had walked 3 more steps before she realized. She turned. He was standing in front of the canned goods aisle. The exact aisle. She had not noticed they were near it. He had clearly noticed. He was holding a small ring box in one hand and a can of generic chicken broth in the other, and he was looking at her with an expression that suggested he had been planning this moment for substantially longer than she would have guessed. "Razvan, I know it's strange. I know it's here." He set the broth down on a shelf. "But this is where it started. This is where I caught you. And I have spent the last 3 years trying to figure out how to tell you that what I caught was not a fainting woman. What I caught was the rest of my life, and I did not know it yet." She could not speak. "I am not asking you to need me," he said. "You don't. You haven't, since the night you walked into that gala alone. I am asking you to choose me the way I chose you the first time I saw your face in a security photograph 2 years before I ever met you. I am asking you to keep choosing me, and to know that on the day you stop, I will let you go without making it harder than it needs to be. As your equal," he added very quietly. "Or not at all." She walked the 3 steps back to him. She took the ring box out of his hand. She did not open it yet. "Yes," she said. "You haven't seen the ring." "I don't need to see it, yes." She opened it then. It was a thin band of old gold with a single small stone, pale green, almost translucent, the color of sea glass. "It's my mother's," she whispered. "How did you—" Ostara had a piece of the original chain set aside. "She gave it to me 4 months ago. She made me promise to ask in a place that mattered." Mireille began to laugh. She laughed the way she had cried in the hospice chapel 2 years ago. Not stifled, not careful, but with the whole of her body, in front of an indifferent shopper pushing a cart past them and a teenage stalker pretending not to watch. In a grocery store, Razvan. In the grocery store. She kissed him. That night, after Tovan had been picked up and put to bed, after the dinner had been cooked and the dishes washed, Mireille walked out onto the small balcony of the apartment she and Razvan had moved into the previous winter. The city stretched below her, ordinary and lit, and humming with all the small lives of all the people who had no idea that anything had ever happened in a glass conservatory 18 stories above the river. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago, in a basement apartment in Wellbridge County, counting pills and dollars and the remaining months of her brother's life. She thought about her mother, who had bought a green silk dress with her own money the week she had walked away from a man who would have made her smaller. She thought about her grandmother, who had not known how to look at the floor. She touched the sea glass at her collarbone. She still wore it. She would always wear it. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel changed. She felt instead like a person who had been returned to herself. Slowly, painfully, with the help of strangers and the kindness of one quiet man and the stubbornness of a 7-year-old boy who had refused to die on schedule. The secret she had been hiding in the grocery store that night was not, in the end, the one she had thought. The secret had not been Tovan. The secret had not been her name. The secret had been the woman she still was, underneath all the disappearing, the one who, when caught, had finally allowed herself to be held. And held, she had stopped falling. And standing up, she had become, at last, exactly herself.